And this is where the articulation of the business goals and objectives comes in, because you're now in a position to start defining where you want to go. And this is where the business goals and objectives come in. So you won't actually say it's not the current state, but you're trying to start thinking ahead what you would like to do in the next few years, where you want to see yourself, which areas of business would you like to operate in, what markets would you like to enter into, right? All of these need to be done. And again, these are fairly long-term. These are not like something what you're going to do tomorrow or day after, but these are strategic. They're going to be significantly long-term, because this is a vision. This is ambitious. This is going to be a long journey. It's not something that can be done with a snap of or a click of a mouse. They can be more descriptive. Obviously, once you have this goal, then you would start thinking about the SMART objectives, as what we call. And the objectives need to be SMART when they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, or real time, and then they're time bounded. Very important, because if your objectives are not SMART, then what happens is you tend to lose motivation to achieve them or to realize them, because they're too ambitious sometimes. So there needs to be a balance of how. That's what I think. In marketing, we studied this marketing myopia, is what we call. You should not be too myopic in terms of your market, that you're just focused on the existing market, the present offering. At the same time, you shouldn't be too broad-minded. It should not be too broad that you completely lose the vision, lose the motivation to go after. So there should be some balance somewhere, is what I think. And to achieve that sense of balance is what, this is what you need to identify whether your goal is SMART or not. For that, you need to be specific. Is it clear? Is it to the point? Is it still ambitious? Is it confusing? Or is it measurable? Can you measure it? Can you try and see whether you can monitor it, and then be able to say that this takes so much time, this takes so much effort, this is of this size? And then achievable. Is it achievable? If not now, can be achievable. It cannot be like a mission impossible kind of a thing. Even mission impossible achievable. So even it's something. I mean, it's not something like I want to go to the third solar system in the galaxy and set up my business there. It's achievable maybe after about 300, 400 years, or in 50 years. But if we don't have that kind of a technology to help us there, sometimes those would be a bit, kind of iffy. And relevant and realistic, very important, because again, that ties down to achievable. They need to be relevant to your business and your goal of a business. It can't be totally unrelated that you lose the motivation to pursue that. And time bounded, there should be some way that you can actually time box it in a way. I want to do it in the next 5 years, 10 years. I want to have in the next 2 years, something like that. Obviously, it doesn't mean I would do it tomorrow, or it's within a couple of hours, but at least some sensible timing must be there. And once you define those business objectives, what's important for you is to define the scope of the solution space. This is where you would need that sense of, okay, what are the boundaries for me? What are the boundaries that I'm going to operate in? And then for that, you need to come up with the organizational structure, the processes and capabilities, the policies, products and services, your technology skills, infrastructure, operations aspect of it. Everything need to be clear. We need to actually have a clear idea what is in scope and what is out of scope, what we're going to do. And that's where the BA and the team should actually come together to help define these potential solutions, where we want to go. Because the reason why we won't have the team there as well is because when we set out initially, the feasibility, to check the feasibility, to establish some kind of boundaries around what you're thinking. Otherwise, we can think too wild or too out of proportion, too ambitious. And then the feasibility of that solution, the viability of that solution needs to be checked by the development team, by the finance team, so that we are staying on the ground. We are not really thinking, too much out of, I don't want to say out of the box, but out of the boxes thinking is important, but it cannot be out of the world thinking most of the time, which is sometimes ambitious. It should be ambitious. It should have like a dream, a vision should be like that. But at the same time, there needs to be some kind of boundaries we set. Otherwise, we're going to waste significant set of resources in achieving that. The critical considerations again are for overall objectives of enterprise. What is important? What are the overall objectives? What are the business objectives that we have as a business, as a group? And what is the subjective and the objective ways of looking at it, the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of each option that we are proposing, each solution, and where does that fit in? So what is the what's the technology angle to it? What's the data? Do we have the resources to do that? What will people perceive this as? Do people think that we're in the right business or not? So all those aspects come in. And then obviously the constraints in terms of the time and the cost, very important again. We're going to discuss those in the next slides, the constraints, yeah. So we need to understand the constraints. We need to, these are basically the time constraints, cost, technology constraints, sometimes infrastructure. We can be constrained by the business, thanks to regulations and the regulatory bodies. So all of these are constraints that we need to stick to, we need to abide by, we need to take cognizance of. And then we can actually kind of put together some of those constraints, or we need to identify those, define those, and then accordingly we need to work it out. So there could be time constraints, there could be budget or cost constraints, there could be infrastructure constraints, policies and procedures that we have, or the government policies could be, or the own businesses' own policies could be that. The availability of the resources, we've got only 2 people working on this. We don't have the Java developer, we have only got PHP developer. We don't have a DBA to manage this. We can only have a developer who can at best try and query the data. We don't have the database administrator. So those are all resource availability constraints. Regulatory compliance is basically, again, going back to the discussion I was talking about, some of the regulators like the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority for banks. And all these different types of regulators, the HIPAAs and the HL7s for the healthcare industry, all these regulations and the kind of compliance factors coming in, we need to abide by those. We have to follow it. Same with, for example, privacy laws and the GDPR, which is again general data protection regulation, right? So data protection and how all the websites, all the digital products which store or which try and access their customers' data, how do they need to operate? How do they need to be lucid and clear about what they are doing the data storage for what purpose they're doing it for? How does that get manipulated? How much, for how long period is the data retained? What are they going to do after the data retention period? So on and so forth. All of these is important because it's a regulation. We have to abide by it. Otherwise it gets out of control. So all of these constraints we need to understand, we need to define, we need to operate. And that's the important thing we need to really be aware of. Constraints need to be addressed. And when it again, we talk about several other constraints, organization structure we need to have. We need to also look at the culture of the organization, look at the capabilities, what we have, what kind of processes we have, what technology we have, what kind of infrastructure, the policies, procedures, bylaws, what kind of documentation we have, the business architecture that is potentially available for us at the moment, internal assets, what kind of, again, resources we have, what kind of physical resources, what kind of skills and technology and the knowledge and the experience. The domain knowledge, for example, is a big asset. All of these we need to really try and retain, identify. We need to also look at assumptions. I'm going to talk about it in the later slide as well. Very important. We need to identify the assumptions. We need to validate the assumptions. We need to confirm the assumptions. And then we need to obviously define what's the potential value for the offering that we want to do. What is it that we're trying to get out of, right? So if that is not there, the value is not defined, then people would question why we are doing something. What's the motivation for us to do a certain thing over the other? Very important from that angle.